Welcome to a very special episode of Cosmic Road, where we are joined by the one and only Mary Rodwell, one of maybe Australia's premier UFO researcher and author. Welcome to the show, Mary.
It's a pleasure, Jack. Thank you for inviting me.
And you have done regressions on many experiencers. Do I understand that right?
Many hundreds, absolutely.
Many hundreds. And you have regressed Peter Maxwell Slattery, right?
I had it. In fact, it was the very first time he'd ever had a regression, and he filmed it. So what came through was actually more than he expected, because we didn't just get his memory of having a contact encounter, but also this intelligence came through him saying that Peter was actually quite stubborn and needed to be more open to things. This is quite a few years ago now. Obviously, Peter's changed a great deal since then.
Oh, that's amazing. I interviewed Peter recently, and I've been following him for years. And of course, I'm familiar with some of your work with him, and I've seen many of the interviews that you've done, and I've always been impressed by your material and the information that you have, because you have done so much research and talked to so many experiencers, and you've gathered so much data on the phenomenon. And also more some of the spiritual aspects of the phenomenon as well. Is that right?
Jack, I think you can't divorce this from, in fact, the spiritual aspect of this, because what we've discovered in our research, and this is also part of the research of Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, that I'm one of the co-founders with Dr. Mitchell, obviously.
I didn't
Dr.
know that. That's so cool.
Yeah, I was one of the founders, and Ray Hernandez. So we actually were the four that created the foundation, and a survey that went with that, ultimately, of 4,200 people, over 10 countries, 600 questions, very in-depth, which was in the book Beyond UFOs. What I'm saying is that what we discovered is that really this is about consciousness, and about consciousness being primary, and we can't divorce that with the fact that for many, many years, this has been looked at in a very, I believe, limited way. You know, the nuts and bolts of it has been important in the sense of gathering data, pictures of the craft, landing sites, all this kind of thing has been, of course, very important. But what has not been really explored in depth is those that have experiences, because it's been hard to quantify, because they can't bring a piece of the craft back, can they? How do they prove they've had experiences? And one of the things that makes it even more difficult was, with the survey that we did of all these, thousands of people, was that 75% of their encounters were out of body. So think only 25% were actually physical. So again, how do you prove that this is real to mainstream, or to even the more nuts and bolts part of ufology? Because there's nothing tangible you can actually offer them about your experience, other than you have shifted and changed on multiple levels. And what we noticed was, out of that 4,200 people, 85% had a psycho-spiritual transformation, which means their whole world changed, the whole paradigm changed, the way they looked at life, the way that they changed their diet, the way that they literally looked on everything in terms of their world was dramatically changed after their encounters. And that doesn't happen unless something's real. You don't suddenly change and want to take care of the ecology, or you're suddenly fascinated with quantum physics, or you find that you want to do healing, or you find that you lose interest in materialistic values. These things don't occur unless something very profound has occurred to you. And this is the evidence of contact.
And okay, so those symptoms or side effects of contact are also very similar to the what near-death experiencers describe as well. And I think it was the Edgar Mitchell Foundation that noticed that I think it was 30% of alien abductees were near-death experiencers. Can you speak to that at all, or the connection between near-death experiences and what we might think of as ET contact?
Well, Ray Hernandez called it the contact modalities. And what we're looking at is that it's not just those that have ET encounters through craft and seeing craft, or having being taken, we find that those that have had near-death experiences out of, astral traveling, remote viewing, shamanic experiences, seeing spirits and what have you, ultimately it's all in the same bucket, if you like. It just means there are different ways of accessing the non-physical realms, because what, again, many people don't realize is we're not just talking about physical non-human intelligences. We're talking about interdimensional ones, extra-dimensional ones, trans-dimensional ones, and possibly some that are coming from our future. So we've got this whole bucket of intelligences in different frequencies that you access once you have, for example, a near-death experience, which changes your whole way of perceiving things in many cases. Astral traveling, for example, the people that, consciously astral travel, example, and have out-of-body experiences. And remote viewing is another one where your consciousness can tap into these realms and these intelligences. So it isn't just one way that you can tap into such intelligence. It can happen because you're very psychic. You might be a clairvoyant, clairaudient, that think that your guardian angel or your guide is, an American Indian perhaps, or a Tibetan monk, and you find out that it's a mantis being or a blue being or a, and this is what I mean, is it covers all of that. It's just that we put everything into boxes. In the spiritualist church, I've met many spiritualists that say the trouble is, Mary, that it's fine if I have a guardian angel, and it's fine if I'm talking to a spirit of my mum or whatever, but for goodness sake, I can't talk about the blue being that keeps appearing in my room and says he's my family. I can't say that because they won't accept it. So even within the more open parts of any of these, like metaphysics or New Age, if you come into the ET stuff, many of them will translate that or interpret that as being demonology or entities that aren't okay, and that's of course not the case.
Yeah, it's so sad that a lot of people, interpret all this in terms of angels and demons, and they impose a strict religious framework on contact. And I know from personal experience that there's a religious, or not a religious, but a spiritual element to this, a metaphysical consciousness element from to a lot of this. But I don't think it in terms of religion. I think that religion is an unfortunate overlay for a lot of this. But it's how people interpret it, and it is what it is. How do you open people's minds to the idea that it may be more than that and deeper than that?
Well, I think if they're having experiences, that does it anyway, because it challenges all their belief systems. And this is what I think it's meant to do. There are many people that come to me, they don't even believe, some people don't believe in aliens, don't believe in ETs, don't believe the spaceships, yet they're having experiences. So it's not about a belief, it's about a reality for them because they experience it, and they have no choice but to start looking at it. And in my book, The New Human, in one of the chapters, I look at this religious side of it, the religious overlay. And I've got two ministers of religion that speak about this experience. Reverend Carter is one of them that talks about his experiences and how he's come to understand the Gospels in a whole new way of interpreting them through his ET contact. And another gentleman who was a minister for 40 years saying, I knew all of this because I was having experiences, but I wasn't able to talk about it in my congregation because, of course, it was one step too far. And he regretted that. But, the fact is the Catholic Church has always acknowledged that it isn't demonology, that it's a real experience. And there are others that look at it completely as demonology. And I remember a lovely young Indian young adult saying to me, the trouble is, Mary, he said, that in my culture, he said, I know I'm a starseed. He said, I've always known that I'm a starseed, and it's, we come from the stars. And he said, but my countrymen, he said, we've got about 100 gods and they worship these gods. He said, but I know they're extraterrestrials, but I can't tell my family that. I can't tell my relis or my countrymen that, because they would laugh at me and they wouldn't believe it. He says, but they're worshiping extraterrestrials. So what do you do with that? And this is the conflict with a lot of the religions. When it's been profoundly difficult for some. I remember a young man in Australia saying to me, I know I'm a starseed, but my parents are very religious and very orthodox. And he said, You know, I know what they're, you know, the way that they trust their religion and believe in it. I can't tell them what I really know about myself. And he'd even contemplated committing suicide because he didn't want to tell his parents that he couldn't take on their limited framework of understanding, because for him it was far greater than that. So it causes enormous amount of pain and conflict if you've, you know, really brought up, or you're still subscribing on one level to a more religious framework.
Now, do religious people have more religious experiences? Do they interact with the phenomenon, and you know, does it reflect their own beliefs back at them?
To a certain extent, it's like this. If you're coming from a more traditional, say, Christian belief system, when you're seeing what you think is an angel, could very well be a light being, which is, you know, an ET, but they're saying, I'm seeing an angel. They'll see what they want to see in many cases until they're actually ready to open up from that. So to start with, it may be interpreted very much to their religious belief system. They won't want to expand on that. But ultimately, for many, they do get challenged to see other things, and they may interpret them as demons. They may interpret them as evil until they explore it in more depth. And hypnosis is really good because it actually forces you to see the reality. It forces you to see what's going on, and it helps you understand a far more complex picture, but one actually that ends up making a lot more sense, because you can actually start to connect the dots. And, you know, people are very afraid of hypnosis. They think in some way they're going to be taken over, or they're going to, you know, see more than they want to, or whatever. Often hypnosis is the most healing thing they can do, because it gives them a chance to explore their fears, to explore what it is they've been frightened of. And I always remember a lovely gentleman that was absolutely fine when it came to most of the ET contact on the craft. But he said, the thing that really scares the living daylights out of me, Mary, is when that eye starts to come towards me, that big black eye. And I said, so what do you think happens when that eye comes towards you? And he said, well, I think they're taking me over. And he says, but I've got to find out. I can't live with this fear anymore. And so we did this. He was very brave, and he went back into the picture of this eye coming towards him, and he was getting more and more anxious and more nervous as he was doing it. And all of a sudden, he completely relaxed. And I said, so what's happened then? He says, he says, they're just giving me information. So what he thought was that eye coming towards him was going to actually take him over, was actually downloading information and giving him information. Once he knew that, the fear completely went. So often our fears are what it might be rather than what actually happened. And that I've found numerous times with those that I've worked with. They've completely revised the way they've looked at their experiences after the event, once they've actually understood what's been going on.
Okay, so what did it download him? Does he even know?
Or in many cases, they will know some of it. The thing is, one of the classic signs of having an experience too is the downloads. And the downloads can come in the form of music, in the form of artwork, or in the form of scripts or language. In terms of scripts, I've met hundreds of people that have downloads of strange writing or scripts, that some of it looks like Chinese, some of it looks mathematical. It can be a whole range of things. And some of it they can translate, some of it they're not always able to translate. The downloads can come in scientific information like quantum physics, like Ray Hernandez of the Free Foundation was getting downloads of quantum physics, for example. It may be to do with cosmology. It may be to do with understanding energy and frequency. It may be to do with healing, new healing techniques or whatever. So there's a whole range of downloads. And as I say, some of it you can, some of the languages that people come out with, and I'm not talking about just adults, children as well, talk these light languages or star languages that can resemble some of human language, but not completely the same. They come out with this spontaneously, often with healing and bringing in the frequencies. And it's quite interesting that sometimes they can even communicate with someone else who's tapped into light language and talk to each other in a light language. And I've got a 7-year-old that was doing that with another child, and they were actually able to have a conversation in this light language. The light language seems to come from the soul origin or their galactic family. So it's tied into that, but can, to a certain extent, be connected to certain human languages as well, but it's not exactly the same.
And
So
what do
this
they
is all the phenomena.
what do they say in these light languages? Do we know? Do they know?
Yeah, so some of it is, in fact, explaining why they're having contact. It may be why we're being visited, what we need to do about the planet. It may be concepts. It may be understanding of cosmology or science or understanding more of the soul or whatever. So it can be a whole range of things, but some of them are not translatable. Some of them are packets of information. And as one young lady described to me, that one symbol alone can fill a room with encyclopedia information. So in other words, it's a packed program, if you like, in that one symbol, that if you could unpack it, she described it a bit as saying, it's like the word Christmas. What is attached to Christmas? Santa Claus, the tree, buying presents, everyone getting together, the Christmas turkey, how it brings in all of that information just by the word Christmas, for example. So it's a bit like that, only on a much more complex scale. And I do feel these are like new software for the new upgraded human, because I believe as our DNA is switched on, that's the dormant DNA that we don't understand yet, which I believe is waiting to be activated with information. I believe this is the new software, perhaps, that will help us operate the new aware human, the more awake human, the more multidimensional, tapped in human.
I could definitely use an upgrade, Mary. I'm ready. I'm ready. Okay, so but some of this stuff is actionable. You say they're learning healing techniques. The one
Mm,
gentleman was even getting some physics, and that he could use. There was
yeah,
actionable,
yeah,
understandable physics that he could do something with.
yeah, absolutely.
Do we know what he did with that physics?
Well, some people don't know what to do with it because they don't know a physicist, or they don't know someone in a scientific field. So what we were doing with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, because Dr. Edgar Mitchell himself is it, he's a physicist and astronomer, and he is able to look at some of this and decode it from his perspective. But the trouble is too, with that, sometimes somebody who's downloading all of this doesn't have the academic terms for what they're being given the download for. So it makes it difficult sometimes for someone who is a physicist, for example, to actually understand from a more simplistic language, even though the concept is quite amazing. So sometimes it takes a while for that to be worked out. But there is an enormous amount of people in academia that have had contact that will never talk about it, but get these insights. And then they're the ones that we, like Nikola Tesla and what have you, always knew that he was connected to these intelligences. And, a lot of others that we know about were actually, without saying it out loud, were actually getting these downloads. Usually, I think it was Einstein saying he goes into a meditative state and suddenly these things be made available to him. That's a download. That's a download from whoever wants him and thinks he can utilize the information.
Well, he definitely utilized a lot, and Nikola
Mm.
Tesla would leave us tantalizing clues. If we only understood the secret of the 3, 6, and 9, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I would love to know what that is. Now, you talk about people learning, healing abilities. I've learned Reiki over the last few years. If you're familiar with Reiki, healing modality. And there are some who believe that that is passed on to humans by higher dimensional beings, aliens, whatever you want to call them. Some people believe those are the Arcturians. I don't know much about that. But are you in your research, have you gotten a picture of what sorts of beings are working with us and giving us this information? Who is giving us what? Why? Do you have any idea of the overall sense of this stuff and the interactions and who is doing the interacting?
Well, that's a good question, and it's still an evolving one in terms of the source of certain types of healing, for example, or information. Interestingly, I've been working with a 7-year-old girl from the US who identifies with being part human, part blue avian being. And she describes that she is a healer. She told me quite bluntly, I'm a healer. I've come in as a healer. And what she explained was that with the energy she brings in, the light language, and she brings in the frequencies with her healing. But she says, what I do is activate others so they can do their own healing. So she activates the healing ability in the people that she works with. And this is a 7 giving that concept, which I think is quite incredible when you think about it. So the kids are very aware in many cases of their origins, or various places they come from, and this is more available to them because they've not been shut down and what have you. But getting back to those that identify more as hybrids, we're all hybrids to start with anyway, because I believe we've all been intelligently designed, as Dr. Francis Crick also believed, that we had assistance by various intelligences, and Homo sapiens sapiens was evolved from from these intelligences that came and added their own DNA. And that's a whole nother ball game that I've been very, very fascinated with anyway, as because it makes so much sense. But the ones that are relating to being hybrids are also connecting more to these intelligences that they say are out there. How many, I can tell you of an Australian family, all the children draw the beings, and the eldest one, Gigi, has drawn 260 different images of beings that she's seen. So we're talking about, a cosmos of intelligent life. And we only hear of the greys or the energy beings. In fact, the ones that most people see are in fact energy beings or humanoids. After that are the greys and tall greys, and all the others, the blue beings, the blue avians, reptilians, and Draco and mantis, and there's a whole plethora of different types of intelligences. What these children are saying, they're coming in with particular abilities. So, I was talking to a 10-year-old some time ago who explained this is his first incarnation on planet Earth. He comes from a planet where he was blue. He explained that he was a center seed he has the ability to connect to the planet, and he's going to help with all the ecology to clean up the planet and what have you. And that's his understanding. He said, it's my first time on this planet. So he picked a mother that had been on this planet multiple lifetimes to help him understand humans. Because for some of these new kids coming in, these new humans, then not all of them have been here before. And so they don't like it. And they'll say, I want to go home. I don't like this planet. I don't like the way humans behave. I don't like the way they treat each other and whatever. And they struggle. It's like, they've gone from one culture, say in Russia, and then suddenly had to adapt to being Australian or whatever, and saying it doesn't work for me. I don't like it here, only more so, because as one interesting young lady, she was all of 8, and she said she was a hybrid and a water being plus a human. And she said, I come from a water planet. And she says, when I look in the mirror, I'm seeing my water being self. And what was interesting about her awareness was, she says, when I hear music, I don't just hear the music as most people do. I can follow the frequency right back to the person who created the music and the emotions and the intent behind the music. So she had a whole new way of unpacking that frequency into a multidimensional depth, which is just amazing. So we've got these kids coming with abilities from all over the cosmos, with new frequencies, new abilities, new ways of healing, new ways of understanding reality, etc. And they're bringing them to the planet now. So we're talking about an enormously complex program of intelligences that look human, are on this planet as your kid, or your grandma or your granddad, who might have had experiences, and they're coming in with abilities from places that have more understanding of reality. and maybe healing, maybe ecology and whatever, and they're bringing those gifts into human form. So we are very much the aliens, if you like, in many cases. It's just that we're in a human form now, living an Earth life. And that's why you can't look and say, is this a, just about a three-dimensional perspective and not a spiritual one? Because when I've asked people in hypnosis, did you consent to this experience? They said, yes, before I came here. They already knew that they'd made an agreement on a soul level to come to this planet to help the planet.
That's amazing. And so you're talking about these children, are these star seeds, are these indigo children? And can you tell us, what those terms mean?
Well, star seeds, I think we're all star seeds, first of all. But there's been an upgrade of star seeds over the last, I believe, 100 years. And I think that's because of the technology has become very threatening to many of these intelligences that are seeing what we're doing with it and whatever. So the star kids are upgrades of that, and they're given different names. Indigo is one of the ones that most people know because they've got an indigo energy, which makes them actually the warriors, the rebels, the ones that want to change the system. You've got crystal children, golden children, there's a whole range of names, rainbow children, whatever, which really just explains their energy, their aura, their energy field, with different missions. Some have come in as healers, some have come in as ecologists and work with earth energies and what have you. So they've all come in with a mission. We see them as, the new humans, or the star kids and whatever. And the unfortunate thing is that they're often given what I call labels that are, dysfunctional labels, because they're very different to what was considered normal. And they're given labels like ADHD, Asperger's, autism, dyslexic, and I think possibly bipolar as well. And the reason is of that is because mainstream don't understand that these are now coming in with heightened awareness, heightened sensitivity. And I always remember talking to a lovely gentleman. He was in his 50s when I spoke to him about ADHD, because he said, I didn't realize I was ADHD until in my mid-years. He said, but I was always seeing the reality in a multidimensional way. And he said, and for me, ADHD actually translated to him as always dialed into higher dimensions. So what he was saying was that he was seeing a greater understanding of the matrix, or a hologram, if you like, or what we call reality. He was always seeing that right from a small child. And he wrote a book, Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind, because for him, it gave him an ability that others didn't have. What we do with ADHD, unfortunately, is what do we do to program them out of it? Is we medicate them to slow them down so that they're no longer operating on a higher frequency, so we can program into 3D and get them to toe the line, as it were, and be programmed, because that's what I think it is. Every one of those so-called dysfunctions often has a different awareness. They can be synesthetic, for example, and I don't know if, to explain synesthesia to some people would be considered a dysfunction. What it is somebody seeing things multidimensionally. For example, if you wrote the letter 6 just as a letter, for them they would see it as an energy, as a feeling, as a color, as well as the letter. So they would actually be getting a whole packet of information on that one letter 6, which you and I would just see as a 6. So synesthesia really is not a dysfunction. It's where we're going. We're all going to be activated sufficiently to understand things from a whole different level of reality.
Yeah, it breaks my heart to think about all the people who have been treated, psychiatrically or even institutionalized over the many centuries, who probably were just having contact and experiencing reality different from the rest of us. I like to think that that is changing now. Do you think that is changing and people are being taken more seriously now?
Well, it's a good question, Jack, and I'm hoping to see that in my lifetime. The fact is, for sure, people have been literally demonized or considered to be crazy or dysfunctional or whatever, because they've seen more of a greater reality around, you know, they've seen energies, or they've seen spirits, or they've seen balls of light, or they're being precognitive and they're seeing future events and what have you. Still going to mainstream in most cases. You start saying, well, you're getting information in your head, or they're saying, are you hearing voices? You know, oh dear me. You know, we've got some good medication for that, to, you know, dumb you down and shut you down. It's still happening in many cases for a lot of people. And that's why it's a very big fear when people contact me and say, I hope you don't think I'm crazy because I'm having this, this, and this, and this. And this is a real problem that although I've met many psychologists that went into psychology because they were having experiences and wanted to understand them. I've known psychiatrists, for example, that have had experiences and whatever, but they're few and far between. I've met quite a few MDs that have had experiences and have been very open to this, but they don't talk about it with their colleagues or their peer group, because it's still very much part of, if you're hearing voices, then there's something wrong with you. And yet, ultimately, this is a very common thing with communication. We've had so many in our history that have had this happen, that have brought in information. Leonardo da Vinci was one of them, all the inventions and whatever as well. So what I would say is there's a certain openness in certain circles, even if it's just more privately. And it is becoming more of a thing to talk about consciousness, and that consciousness is primary. And that through all these different ways, whether it's out of body, astral travel, shamanic experiences, healing experiences, clairvoyant experiences, or whatever, is becoming a lot more acceptable. It's still not quite mainstream. Trouble is, you see, with the fact that we've had this truth embargo on the reality of ETs visiting this planet, that has actually caused the most harm, because it's being deliberately encouraged to look on everything like this as, you know, tin hat stuff and conspiracy and all the rest of it. And there's been countless, not just hundreds and thousands and millions, probably billions of people that have been misdiagnosed as having something wrong with them, when in fact all they're doing is having or all that's going on is that they're having contact. And I've had some really sad cases. I wrote in the book, my book Awakening, of a case study of a 19-year-old girl that contacted me saying, I think I'm having these experiences. And she said, when I was having them all my life up to 14, I went to the doctor and said, I'm seeing aliens. And he said, there's no such thing. And he heavily medicated me, said I was schizophrenic. And she nearly committed suicide 2 or 3 times because of the medication. And she said it was a talk show that she'd seen on telly, of an American talk show where people were talking about their experiences. And she said, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I might actually be okay, and that I'm not crazy after all. So she had to face the fact that she'd been given all this medication to shut her down, which was very toxic to her body, realizing ultimately that it was a truth, that it was real. And that was a whole new thing for her to come to terms with, that, you know, all these years she believed she was crazy. And this is just one tip of the iceberg, and why I'm so passionate, Jack, with getting this information out and doing these interviews, is because I know there's countless people out there, countless, that don't know what's going on, think maybe they are going crazy or whatever, either because their religion tells them so, or their education tells them so, or psychiatry tells them so, or whatever, when in fact, we know this is real. They've been visiting us right from the dawn of history. We're part of them. We're all part of these intelligences that are coming to this planet. And ultimately, it's this disclosure, this drip feed disclosure, that is not helping these people understand the true nature of their experience and what's going on, and to us start to embrace the fact that we're part of a cosmic and galactic community.
Oh, that's beautiful. We really are. And so much of your information comes from regressions. I wanted to ask you about that because there's like different types of regressions. There's the
Mm,
Dolores Cannon deep regression,
yeah.
so deep that entities can come through and talk through the person that's under trance, or whatever the right word is. And then there's the more the David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins style, regression, which is more of a softer hypnosis. It's a relaxation techniques, and they get very different data, than more scary kind of data than the Dolores Cannon, way of regression, which is more spiritual and which I definitely resonate more with. But I don't discount any information that comes through. So what style of hypnosis do you practice?
Well, it's a good question. But first of all, I would say, I knew Dolores. She came and spoke to my groups a few times. We met at conferences where we were both speaking, and I knew of her process, and it's quite a long, drawn out one and very in depth. My process is not so time, doesn't take as much time. In other words, it's something I can do in less time. I still find that I get a lot of similar data. You don't have to be in deep trance to get information. There's only about 20% of people that go somnambulistic naturally anyway. So when you use a long time to get there, then people may very well go a lot deeper. But I've found that often as not, as long as the client trusts you, you can get an enormous amount of data in a very short time. And it doesn't mean that they're completely unconscious in any state of, or they're still aware of what's going on, but you're keeping them down what I call the yellow brick road, which says, this is the path we're asking your subconscious to deliver information. So I don't need to spend that kind of time, but I'm still getting very similar information, just like, Peter had a being come and speak through him. That wasn't a long drawn out thing at all. I find that I don't need to do that as long as the person trusts you and has confidence in you and they're ready and they're not in fear. You can get a great deal of information. What also you may not know about with hypnosis is, depending on what your questions depends often on what you're going to get from the person itself. When it comes to Dr. Jacobs, who I've met, Bud Hopkins I've met several times, the concern for me was they already had a perspective on these intelligences. I remember saying over lunch with Bud Hopkins once with another researcher, and I was saying, so what about those people that in regression, I've said to them, have you on any level consented to this experience? And they said, yes, I did before I came here. I said, so they're saying that they're not a victim. He actually shut the lunch ended abruptly.
That's disappointing.
The other thing was that when I said, because he would hear stories of positive experiences and what have you, and he basically said in many lectures that that's because the aliens are manipulating their mind to think it's positive. So what I'm saying is he was, in my view, had a biased perspective to start with anyway. So he was going to see everything as negative, no matter whether they had healing procedures or whether it had, and I knew that because he said it. He said he believed everyone was being manipulated if it was positive. So you can't go in with an agenda when you're taking somebody into hypnosis. And I will say this, his hypnosis was learned by observing others. He never did any training or whatever. He just learned the technique of taking. So I'm that worries me as well, because unless you are understanding how to be neutral and objective when you're taking someone in, you're already, programmed them into the questions that you want answered in a certain way. And I have a similar kind of perspective with Dr. Jacobs, in the sense that you can take this to a whole new level. You can take people into seeing a scenario, for example. It's like taking somebody and showing them their appendectomy, for example, saying, here you are, this is the vision of your appendectomy, without any explanation whatsoever. You're saying, look, see what they're doing to you, right? Isn't that terrible? Look what they're doing. They're doing this and this to your body and whatever. If there's no explanation of that, you're thinking, these people are terrible. Look what they're doing to me and whatever. You have to take it to that next level. And that's when somebody isn't fully trained, they will leave it at that and say, well, there you are, they're bad. This is what they're doing. Look what they're doing. What you've got to do is the understanding behind it. If you say to somebody, well, that was the appendectomy because if we didn't remove the appendix, you're going to die. Oh, oh, all right, that's pretty rough, but thank goodness I didn't die. That's fine. And that's the next bit of it. So when I do hypnosis, I'm not just getting them to see the scene, which may look like a medical procedure, or it may look like whatever, and they don't understand. I'll say, now we're going to find out what they're doing. So you, in that particular space, you can actually get a dialogue going where I'll say, is there any of them looking familiar to you? And they'll usually say, yes, this one. And the reason they're familiar is because they've seen them before. So I can say, how many times have you been picked up? And they'll reel off 2, 5, 7, whatever it is. Ask that being now, what are you doing? And they'll come back and say, oh, it's just a medical exam. They're checking up on me and whatever. I said, have you got any other questions you'd like to ask? Yeah, why is that important now? And they'll get the answer back. It's important for this, that, and the other. So you've got a dialogue explaining what that is. And that can completely shift the person, including asking, have you on any level consented? Oh, yes, before I came here as a soul. That completely changes the victim into someone who now understands their part in this and why and then they will say, and this one's part of my family. I've got some of his genetics. He's part of my my soul group or whatever. So they're connecting to family, they're connecting to why they're there, they're connecting to what's actually happening. They come out of this with a whole new perspective. If you don't do that and you just take somebody to a scene where it looks horrific, then of course they're going to say, that's terrible, how dare they, or whatever. And that's my problem with those that learn a bit of the techniques, but don't take it to the level where the person gets real understanding. They just see the disaster and think, well, that's it. And this is what's happened, I think, in many cases with amateur hypnotherapists that haven't actually looked at this from a therapeutic healing perspective. And you've got to understand about not leading them as well. Because the other thing is that they'll say, oh, well, that person's leading them. Well, some may very well do that if they don't know that that's not what you do. And somebody says to me, well, are you leading them? I said, I don't tell them what to say. I'm just saying what happens next. They tell me what happens next because if you like, their subconscious is just a blank tape that records everything that they're seeing and experiencing. And as long as you allow that to happen, you don't need to lead them. You don't need to tell them where to go. All you're saying is, what's the next thing that happens? What are you seeing now? You're not giving them any indicator of what you think they should see or not see. And that's because you know what you're doing. But there are been a lot of amateurs within particularly ufology, that have said, oh, I know how to take somebody into a hypnosis or whatever. And they blindly go in without having any idea of the consequences unless they fully understand what they're doing.
No, I love that. I'm so glad you explained that because I've talked a lot on the channel about what I call the silos of information. And this is especially apparent in the Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs silo of information that they're getting versus the Dolores Cannon, Barbara Lamb silo of information that they're getting. Totally, doing, hypnotic regression on experiencers, getting completely different data. But maybe you have answered that. You maybe you figured it out that David Jacobs is looking at the appendix and not the appendectomy. I love that. I think
Exactly.
that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Exactly. It's just that a lot of the earlier regressionists, that they were more interested in, what are you seeing? What's in the craft? What equipment are you seeing? How many of the different beings are you seeing, or whatever? But that only gives you a visual. It doesn't tell you what that visual is about, other than, yes, you're on a craft and you're seeing all these different things. You want to know why you're there. If you're an experiencer, you want to know, why have they picked you up? Why you? I say, well, why me? What's it all about? They want answers, and they can get answers in that state because they're in a different frequency, and they can have a dialogue. They can, with these intelligences, you say, okay, so why do you pick me up? What is the purpose of it? Why are you showing me this, that, and the other? So all the questions, because what I do when someone does hypnosis, I'll say, write all your questions down, write them all down. And from priority, write down the list. And we'll ask those questions when you're in that state, because you'll be amazed at how much they understand once they're in that state, and they're not blocking it with their 3D, trying to analyze and be logical and analytical. then they can actually access this information. Once they realize how to do it, then they get so many of their questions answered. Although I will tell you, there was one hypnosis I did with a lady who got 3 or 4 pages of questions. And I remember thinking, how am I going to get through this in 2 hours, you know? And I took her on, she was on a craft, and she said, don't talk to me, I'm getting information. And I sat there for about 10 minutes, total silence. And then she says, now she said, so I said, so are you ready now to ask these questions? And she says, no, she says, because I don't need to know them now, because I've got all the information I need. And it was like she'd gone into a space where everything was made available to her. And so those 3 pages were irrelevant.
Irrelevant. That's amazing. I wish I could go into that space. I want all the answers. That's amazing. That's amazing. And you facilitated that. Did she remember that when she came out?
Yeah, because a lot of the time, well, they can and they can't, but one of the what you can do as they're leaving that state, that altered state, you can say, you are to remember everything now that you've discussed, and also more information will come in as you now need it in and you can if you like, integrate it. So you're actually putting in a program to say, now more of this information will be made available to you. So also when I do a session, I record it always, and I say, when you listen to it, you will get more information, because as they listen to themselves speaking, more information will come in.
Makes sense.
Because they're in that frequency again. So it continues to work for them. So it's not just the regression, because that's just starting them, opening the door. What you can do then is give them a tool to actually access more and more of that information, so that the other things will start to come in. It's amazing how much Mary, since the regression, I now know about this, I know about this, I now know about this. So you can literally open the door for them. And that is amazing, because it helps them make sense. They can start connecting the dots to other things that have happened in their life.
Now, sometimes when I meet experiencers and I ask them, have you ever considered, hypnotic regression to figure it out, to learn what's going on? And most of the answers that I get are no, because I am afraid that it's traumatic. I'm afraid that if I learn the truth, I'll be traumatized by it. Maybe there's a reason they wipe my mind. What do you say to those people?
I will say to them that if they want answers, then hypnosis is a really good way to do it. Facing the fears that may not actually be what you think they are. I'll give you an example of another really interesting one. Was a lady in her 60s in the UK. Her whole family had had experiences with their car being taken up, her daughter and her grandkids. She'd had fear about this all her life. She said, I've always been terrified. And she was dreading doing the hypnosis, even though she wanted to do it, because she wanted answers, because her grandson also was quite fearful as well. So I said, I want you to go to the origin of your fear. So the beginning of when this fear started. She went right back to being 2 years old in the cot. And I said, so what's happening? And she said, well, I've got these 2 strange beings looking down at me. I think I'm not sure whether they were mantis beings or whatever, but they were looking down on her. And I said, so what did they do? Did they harm you in some way or whatever? She says, no, she said, they're just observing me. I said, so they didn't hurt you or harm you? She said, no. She said, but it scared me so much, she said, that I've got all this fear and she actually described the fear like an energy in her back. So working with her, I helped her to remove that frequency, if you like. It's using visualization and whatever. She came out of it and she was almost dancing around the room. She said, now I know they never harmed me. They were always helping me. It was just that they had scared me that time, and that had stayed with me. She actually knew that she'd actually been helped and supported all through her life. She was a different person. And when her 15-year-old grandson said, I'm not sure I want to do it, in fact, she said, look at me. She said, I've never felt so wonderful. And what was interesting with the 15-year-old, he'd had experiences where the craft had visited him and all the rest of it. He said, oh, okay. So now, and he's actually chatting to them in the regression and saying, oh, that's right. I must keep off drugs and I must do this. And this is why this is. And he came out of it again, completely in a different space. So for me, in most cases, it's been absolutely healing, because they finally faced their fear and discovered that often it's the fear itself that's been the problem, not actually what happened.
That's amazing. I love it. That's a beautiful story of you helping that woman, and I'm sure that many other people could get help similarly if they would do this. Now I have to get back to something because you raised something earlier. You said that when you were regressing Peter, that a being came through and started talking. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what that being had to say.
Well, it was the first time Peter had ever had a regression, so for him it was all a new experience. And he'd being the technician he is, he had all of the cameras and all the rest of it. And of course, it was a Zoom because I do a lot of my sessions over Zoom right across the globe. You know, it doesn't matter if you're in Chile or you're in Holland or whatever. As long as you can speak English, I can work with you, which has been really great. But so this one was remotely. He was in Melbourne, and I'm obviously here in Queensland. And it was an experience where he'd believed he'd had missing time with a friend. And he said, you know, I'd like to find out. This is a lot of years ago now. I'm not sure if it's as much as 10 years or whatever, but it was certainly a long time ago. So I'm taking him into the usual place, you know, where he's suddenly explaining that he was taken, that this is where the missing time was and all the rest of it. Then all of a sudden, his energy shifted and he said, I think it was one of his guides or whatever came in and said, started to speak. And he talked everything in the third person. Peter's very stubborn. He won't listen. He won't listen to us. He's needing to do this, this, and this, but he's so stubborn, and he kept coming up with how stubborn he was and whatever, and explaining, you know, and you know, Peter needs to do this and Peter needs to do that or whatever. I think Pete's probably got it on one of his. I'm sure he's got it, and he'll, you know, made available or whatever. But it basically was saying to him, stop being so stubborn, start listening to us. And of course, since then, he's written a lot more books and he has been listening. But that was a big one for Pete because he didn't even know when he came out of it what had happened. He didn't understand what had happened and whatever. And I will say to you that it's not rare either, that there are those that when I'm doing hypnosis sometimes, one of these beings, one of these intelligences, even their guide or whatever, may come in and give information about them that they want them to understand or to, so they'll talk directly. It's a kind of overshadowing, as I call it, energetic overshadowing, where if the person is accepting that, they'll come in and give direct information. And as I say, it's happened a number of times, quite a few times with people that, and this isn't deep trance, by the way. This isn't, you know, they're not unconscious. It's just that they've allowed those limits to allow that being in because the being wants to say something directly to me or to them. Sometimes there's been a message for me as well. You know, Mary, you're doing something like you're doing a good job or something like that may come in as well or whatever, which is really nice. But it isn't uncommon for that to happen. But what I think they do it for is they want to make a point. And I think with Pete, they wanted to make a point that he really needed to allow it and open up and write about, obviously, his experiences in the way that he's done. And of course, he's done that beautifully since.
Wow, being scolded by your spirit guide during on camera during a
Yeah.
session, that's amazing. Is
Yeah.
that the most startling thing that's ever come through? What is the most startling thing that's ever come through, or the most interesting or resonant thing that's ever come through, a piece of information or experience?
Well, I think there's so many. I mean, you know,
Well,
when
we'll just
somebody
go.
says,
Maybe give us a couple of them.
well, I would like to say I did have evidence that I possibly went interdimensionally with my client once. And this is many, many years ago when I was in Western Australia, when you had those tapes, you know, the tape recorders with the tape and what have you, you know, the what's name tape where it's a mechanical kind of recorder. I know that a lot of the youngsters won't
A
know what I'm
cassette.
talking about. Yeah, a little cassette tape. And I used to record the sessions on that. And this lady wanted to explore some of her experiences. She was a very, very aware lady. And what, you know, I used to play music. I don't use music anymore, but I used to play music just in the background, take them into an altered state, and then explore whatever experience that they wanted to explore. And this lady believed, and she was talking, that she was going into another dimension in the session. She literally felt she was going into that dimension. So we're doing this session. She's exploring this dimension and what have you. And I didn't know for the truth of it, or it was real, or anything other than that's what she believed was happening. She rang me a few hours later after listening to the tape that I'd given her. The fascinating thing was that all along the music stayed the same, but suddenly her voice, when she talks about going into this next dimension, gets really high pitched, like really high pitched. My voice still sounds normal, the music still sounds normal, but her voice goes high pitched. Then as I'm joining her, my voice becomes high pitched along with hers, but the music stays the same all the way through. And she said, "What does that mean?" I said, "Well, it looks like you went, and so did I." Because the only way we knew it was through the tape, because the tape, as I say, displayed that fact. So we more or less came to the conclusion that's what that was, that we'd actually gone into another dimension, not being aware of it other than the fact that we were in that particular experience. So that
Wow.
was if you want evidence of something unreal or not so easily explained, that was one of them.
I love it. That's a great story. Are you an experiencer yourself, or and I don't even mean of the alien kind necessarily, but the spiritual kind? Since you're aware of all this, do you have a spiritual practice, a meditation? Have you had anything happen? Tell me about your own practices and your own life involving this, if any, if you feel comfortable talking about it.
Oh, look, I will say that I'm not a conscious experience in the sense I haven't had any conscious memory of being on craft, although been told by people they've seen me up there, and sometimes not in my present form. So I suspect that maybe out of body I might be traveling around a bit, like I think we all do anyway. But it's a good question. In terms of my awareness, I did spend 3 years working in a small group. Two of them were clinical psychologists, believe it or not, and one was a nursing sister. And so I was in good company. And what we did was we explored all the healing side of it, how to tap into and connect to what you would call our guides or whatever, or what have you. And ultimately, what that did was show me the reality, because I've had overshadowing experiences as well, where an entity will use you to speak through, and it scared the living daylights out of me at the time. But I realized what was going on because I was trained to understand how it works. So one of the ways that I work is when people are having experiences, they start to open up multidimensionally. They start to see orbs or see energy or feel presences. They may be scared. They may be getting information or communication. They may be scared of that. So I can actually walk them through and give them tools to show them how to manage it so that they're not scared. In other words, it's an ability we all have. We've been born with it. It's just that we shut it down because we're told it's not okay. All I do is remind them how it works, because I was reminded. I spent 3 years training and then spent 2 years training other groups how to do it. So that, really it's about the left brainers that have been, the professionals learning to use more of their right brain multidimensional cells, and the creative intuitives that are not always grounded, to bring them back and ground them so that you're actually operating in harmony between your 3D and your multidimensional, which is what we're meant to do. Our multidimensional explains the third dimensional reality. Without that, you give up and nothing makes sense. So you have to bring that in to explain your 3D reality, and that's what is why people are awakening now, because they're starting to realize they need to trust that knowing, that sensing, that feeling. So I show people how to do it. What it's done is I've helped hypnotherapists to open up to that, because I've said to them, unless you understand your own awareness, how are you going to help somebody who's already opening up multidimensionally? How can you help them understand that and get confidence in it if you don't know the process yourself? So what I've done is do that with the hypnotherapist, because what I didn't tell you is that when I work with hypnosis, I'm not just a recorder, as Doris Cannon is a recorder. I actually see a lot of the stuff that they're seeing.
That's neat.
So I'm going, like I talked about going into the other dimension, I'm actually being shown stuff. So when they're, for example, looking around the room and what have you, I might tell them to look to the right, or they need to look around the room. I'll say, would you like to look around now and see what you can see? Because I'm being given help to literally pinpoint what they need to see. So I'm not just working with their mandate, I'm being given guidance to get the most out of that for what they need. And this is what I teach hypnotherapists how to do, because once they can do it as well, they can enhance, and literally you're being the most efficient then, because you're actually working with not only your own team, but their team and their consciousness, so that you are maximizing the information they need at that moment in time, rather than doing it blindly, thinking, oh, well, we'll try this now, or maybe you need to do that. It'll be that there's someone on the right they need to see. I'd like you to look around the room now. Is there anything that looks familiar to you, or something you're drawn to? Oh, yes, I'm seeing this tall being. Right. Would you like to find out why they're there? Yes, I'd like to find out. Ah, they're telling me this, this, and this. But it's another part of how you can facilitate more information. So it's been very useful to me, and I work with it all the time.
That's amazing. I love it. So you have sensitivities and abilities. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, because everybody has.
Well,
And I
sure,
will
sure,
tell
sure,
you
absolutely.
that,
Yeah. But
as a nurse,
I've never channeled anything before. I think that, you may
yeah,
be one up. You know what I'm saying? Uh, uh,
everyone can tap into it, Jack. This is my point, is that when I joined this group, I was invited to join the group, oh, many, many years ago, 20 years ago now. I believed I was going to watch everyone be amazing, but I would be observing because I was too normal. That was my perspective of myself. I learned in those 3 years that we all could do this, and that actually it's part of our natural abilities. All we need to know is how it works. It's like, you've got the bike there and you know that you have to turn the pedals, but you don't know where the brakes and the lights are. So I'm saying, yes, you can ride the bike. And this is what you need to be aware of. There's a very big difference between our 3D and our multidimensional in terms of when I explain it. In 3D, you think before you speak. When you're multidimensionally connected, you speak before you think. It's the complete reverse. So stuff that comes into your mind before you think about it is when you're connecting to not only your higher self, but the intelligences that support you. So, things that just come into your mind spontaneously is either your higher self or it's one of these intelligences. And then I say to clairvoyants, for example, who do lots of readings and whatever, and they are really accurate, but I say, where is it coming from? They say, oh, I don't know. It's just always very accurate. I say, don't you think you ought to find out who your best friend is? Because at the moment you're talking to them behind a wooden door. Don't you think you should open it and find out who they are? And they say, well, it sounds like a good idea. I says, because then you can communicate, ask questions. So what I do then is I get them to bring that in, to bring in who it is that's supporting them and who the team is, because there's usually a team as well. There's not only what we call the life guide, gatekeeper, guardian angel, whatever name you want to give that source of information, but you've also got others that come in and support you during your life when you're learning. It's like you learned Reiki, you'd have probably had a guide that was encouraging you with your Reiki, for example, and being there for that time. It's okay, so who else is there? And people are just amazed at how easy it is. I say it's easy because it's part of you. You've just not given it the credit it's due. In other words, that sensing, that knowing, that feeling, those insights are coming from somewhere. Sometimes it's your superconscious higher self. Sometimes it's one of these intelligence. Don't you think you ought to find out who they are? And once you've got that, then you're riding the bike and you know how to steer it and you know where to put the lights on and blow the horn. Then you're fully functional. But we're partly functional intuitionally, partly, and sometimes not at all, because we shut it down because everybody tells us it's rubbish and you shouldn't trust anything unless you can work it out. Well, in fact, it's the working out that gets in the way. And if somebody says to me, well, isn't that my imagination? It's a favorite. They all say, well, how do I know it's not my imagination? I'll say, I'll tell you how you know it's not your imagination. Because if something's real, like your bedroom, you know where the door is, you know where the window is, you know where your bed is, because it's your bedroom, it's real. So immediately in your mind's eye, there's your bedroom because it's real. if I said to you, create a bedroom or imagine a bedroom, you'd think, well, how big would the room be? Where would I put the window? What color would the walls be? Would I have curtains? It's a creative process. You don't have that if you're having an insight that's downloaded instantly. You've got no time to create anything. And that's how you know it's not your imagination, because your imagination is a completely different process. So if it's coming in instantly without thought, generally it's either your superconscious self or it's one of these intelligences that wants you to take notice of something. That's the difference. It's as simple as that. Just it's easy, but it's hard. It's hard to shut down left brain, but it's easy because you don't have to think, because it's automatically there. And that's how you connect to your guides, because the words are there, the information's there. And that's as easy as that.
I love it. And okay, well, maybe I'm doing something right because I usually speak before I think. So hey, maybe. Now, when I was a kid, when I was a child, I could feel the energy in my palms that I now think of as chi or the Reiki energy. But nobody around me was talking about this. It didn't seem to be a thing, but it was very real to me. It was very powerful. I could put it on my body and I could feel the energy move around. But nobody was
Yeah.
talking about it. And, I just assumed it was my imagination and it went away until many, many years later, I rediscovered it. Have you always been aware that you have had these abilities and these sensitivities, or is this something that you've rediscovered or discovered as an adult?
Well, to be honest, I didn't wasn't aware that I was any different to anybody else, as a kid. The only thing I will say is I was a bit of a bookworm, and I was always curious about life and what are we here for? What's it all about? What's the big picture? And so you would say I was very spiritual, although I was brought up in a very in a religion, a Catholic religion, which, didn't allow certain things because it was Catholicism and whatever. So you weren't allowed to tap into clairvoyancy and mediumship and what have you, because that was all the devil and all the rest of it. So there was that kind of thing. But the trouble was, for Catholic Church, was that, when you start looking into lots of different areas like reincarnation and what have you, I realized that why is the church saying there's no such thing when so many people have these experiences where they have past lives and whatever. So that started me questioning a lot of stuff, and ultimately looking into everything, healing, clairvoyancy and all that. I met healers, and mediums and whatever, and I was convinced that this was, had integrity and it was real, but I never ever put myself in that box, because I didn't think that, I thought it was always a gift that certain people had and what have you. And some people are more open and more naturally open to it than others. But it never occurred to me that I had any abilities whatsoever until I went to this group. And when I went to this group, the teacher automatically assumed you could do it. She never for 1 minute thought you can't. I was the one that didn't know if I believed it, because when things first to happen and it was accurate and whatever, I'm thinking, oh, that was a bit of a coincidence, wasn't it? Oh, that was another coincidence and what have you. In the end, you can't keep blaming everything on coincidence and whatever. And I started to realize that something very real was happening, something very real. And I tested it. Remote healing, I tested. I would do a remote healing on someone, not tell them, and then a few days later ring them up and say, how are you going? What's happening? And I did it with my dad, who was in England, and he had bad feet. And I remember doing a remote healing on him, thinking, I'll check out and see if it's worked, because I always wanted to check it out. And I rang him up and I said, Dad, how you doing? Oh, not too bad, he goes. And I said, how's things? He said, oh, well, he says, at least my feet have been feeling a bit better, he said, in the last few days. That was exactly where I'd focused, was on his feet, because he had diabetes too. Lots of incidents like that. We would tap into something and I would find, once we connected to our guides, it was spot on. It was always spot on and accurate. And I realized that, yes, everybody could do this. And I spent 3 years, if you like, making sure and testing it out in so many different ways. I tested myself to make sure I wasn't leading myself down the garden path, as it were. And I was then convinced it was absolutely real. And then I was asked to train others. So I did that for 2 years. I did 2 groups, and ones were the professionals, like the psychologists and the teachers, and the ones that were very 3D. And the other ones were the creative intuitives. So I was bringing the 3D ones into multidimensional, and the creative intuitives into grounding them and what have you, because often they were flying a little bit too high with the fairies. So, you know, what it did was a really powerful training ground for me to trust that, because I would go into a session to work with them and I wouldn't even have the meditation in my head. It would come to me as I was going in the room and they would show me. So everything was guided by them. It wasn't me. And that was the scariest thing, because I didn't even know what we would be doing. I'd literally, and my teacher said, your guides are running the class, Mary, not you. And I had to rely on that. And so from that, in the end, I really encapsulated that understanding. And that's why I say to people, you can all do this. Everyone has the capacity, but unfortunately our programming shuts down a lot of the trust in ourselves, trust in that and knowing and that sensing and that feeling. We actually lose confidence in that. So we then dismiss it because that seems to be the thing that you do, and people laugh at it, or they think you're funny, or they think you're weird, or those things that are all programs that limit you from accessing your true nature and your abilities. So what I do when I work with someone who's starting to open up, I say, first, we need to get rid of the programming. I call it defragging the souls, or the modem, if you like. And it's a certain program meditation that gets the superconscious, or asks the superconscious to release anything that's getting in their way, implants, programs, blocks, limits, anything like that from this lifetime or any other, that are limiting them from opening up now to their true self. And it's very short meditation, but it works. And then I work with the energy field. I'm shown the different frequencies to bring in for them. And then after that, I show them how it all works. I lead them through it. And you'll be amazed at how many people then start to see what their guide looks like, have communication with their guide, realize who the team is, get information, ask questions. Once they're starting to do that, I said, now you're just going to expand from that. You're going to find yourself more and more getting answers and sensing and feeling, and in terms of multidimensional information. It will just open the door more and more. The more you do it, the more you get good at it, and you find, you know, that you're getting the confidence to use it in your everyday life. And to me, it's not separate of me. It's something I can be doing something and I'll get some insight, and I'll look down and to get it confirmed will be 11:11 on the clock, or 22:22. Oh, so it's something I've really got to take notice of. Okay, thanks, guys. Or it's information, you know, when you get that resonance, that energy through your body, when you get a bit of information or whatever, that's them confirming you're on track. It's just knowing how you operate. It's getting to know your own operating system multidimensionally. That's all. Once you can do it, you know you're away. You're riding your bike with efficiency.
I love it. And I really am excited about that, that you're teaching people how to do this. And I'm hoping the word spreads and more people learn how to have this connection. I think that's beautiful. And I think that's important moving forward. You're talking about earlier that you had an incident where you had channeled a being. Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Well, I've often mentioned it when I'm talking to people who are a bit afraid that they're going to be, what it's going to mean. Not everybody gets overshadowed. To give you an example of that, most people, when they connect to their guides, they have a dialogue, they have a communication, they feel their presence, they get to know what the different energy signatures of each guide. Once they get to know that, then often there's a, you know, they know what they look like because we've already done that and shown them what they look like. So they've got a photograph of them, that, you know, and they've got to know who they are, why they're with them, all that kind of stuff. Then the next thing is getting used to having the dialogue. And the dialogue will come in pictures, or it may come in auditory as well. It may come in a sensing feeling. All that will be information. Not everyone gets what I call overshadowed, which is the next level. And it's not the level I'm talking about that's like Bashar, you know, and Daryl Anker, where he vacates and lets, you know, Bashar through. It's not that level. It's a kind of interim one, which I spontaneously experienced, which scared the living daylights out of me to start with, because I didn't know what had happened. And it was basically, I was doing psychometry with the group. We'd already done our session and we were sitting around having a cup of tea, very English. And she said, oh, we're going to do some psychometry. And I wasn't too sure about how psychometry worked. And for those that don't know, you can hold an object from somebody and pick up information. It's, you know, you pick up the frequency and you can interpret it. There's no biggie. Anyone can do it. And I'd never done it before. And we went round the group and everyone handed over something that belonged to them. And I was handed a necklace from this lady opposite. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm not going to be able to do this. This is, you know, I'm not going to get anything, because my teacher said, whatever comes into your head, just say it. And I thought, nothing's going to come into my head, because I'm pretty certain I'm not going to get anything. This is very early on in my training, I might add. This was very early on, only a few weeks in. So I really didn't think I could do anything. So I'm holding this necklace and she's going around the group and they're all coming out with what comes into their head. And I thought, oh, well, I can say whatever comes into my head. They won't know whether it's, you know, it's just me making it up or whatever it is, you know. So again, I had no belief in getting anything at all. And as I'm holding it, and she says, Mary, what are you getting? I found that I was getting a picture of a wedding. And thought, oh, this is the person's wedding, you know, and I'm starting to describe it. Then all of a sudden, I'm aware that my consciousness has moved from my body, that I'm sort of outside of it. I can't describe it, but I wasn't here. I was here. And this voice was coming through me saying, you know, I've never left you. I've always been there with you. And that was her husband who died. And he was speaking and talking to her. I'm here thinking, what's happening? Because I had no idea. Something was speaking through my mouth. And I remember my teacher saying, don't touch her, because that messes up the frequency. And telling the lady, talk to him then, talk to him. She normalized all of it. Just talk to him. So they had a conversation. I don't remember much of it because I was over here wondering what the hell's going on, basically. Then all of a sudden, I'm back in my body again. And I remember my teacher saying to me, have you done this before? And I went, no, because it freaked me out. And she said, oh, that's just overshadowing. She completely dismissed it as that's just overshadowing. What the hell is overshadowing? You know, I was thinking, what? But what it did do was prove to me I wasn't making this up, because you can't make something like that up. That either happens to you or it doesn't. And I didn't even know what it was until she told me. The experience of overshadowing doesn't happen to everybody. I've done it. It's happened a few times in my life where ones wanted to come through and they've come through directly for some reason or other. They've needed to do that. Most times I just have the telephone link, as I call it. That's the telephone. Ask the question, get the answer. Ask the question, get the answer. Overshadowing seems to be an interim where there's another level to it. And then there's, of course, the deep unconsciousness. I mean, there's probably other levels, but I keep everything really simple. But the overshadowing is, I've had beings come in that are Tibetan monk or whatever. The language is completely different. You're aware that you're articulating different language. The movements that you're doing are weird, and you're sort of aware of it, but you're not fully in it, because this intelligence is wanting to speak through. And so you just allow, even though you're not fully hearing everything that's being said, even it's just coming out or whatever. So it has happened a number of times, not lots. Mostly I do it just the telephone link, and that's adequate. But what it did do for me, Jack, more than anything, it proved to me this was real. This was a real phenomena, because that was completely unexpected. And, you know, in such a way where there's no meditation. We were drinking cups of tea and eating a sandwich, you know, it was, there was nothing about it that was weird, you know, it wasn't dim lights and candles, and it was nothing of the kind. It was midday, I was having a cup of tea. So that was very convincing to me that something very real happened there. And you know, there are some people where that happens quite naturally as well. It just depends. I remember going the next week and going into the room and saying, I want the telephone link. I don't want that other thing. I don't, because it's, you know, I was basically giving them instructions, not that other stuff. Just telephone links, fine. Thanks very much. Because I was still very uncomfortable with it. But as I got to understand it, it wasn't so scary. And so on some level, obviously, I'd given permission. And they were always beautiful messages, and they were always very powerful and whatever. But getting back to, was aware of that? Not in your life. I had absolutely no idea that that was possible whatsoever. And nobody knows really what's possible unless they give it a go.
Did I understand right that the entity that came through was the late husband
Yeah.
of somebody there?
Yeah, it was the lady opposite that I got the necklace because I saw the wedding consciously. In my mind's eye, I was seeing the wedding and I thought, why am I seeing her wedding? And the next thing, I'm actually moved, my consciousness moved to one side and her husband came through and said, I've never left you. I'm always with you. And he was having a conversation with her. None of us expected that, of course. I mean, it was just me perhaps picking up some information, in my third eye or whatever from the necklace that I was holding, the energy of the necklace I was holding. But it actually acted as a catalyst for that to happen. So obviously, and I had no idea what was going on. I hadn't a clue other than I wasn't in my body. I was pushed to one side basically, and I was just observing.
Okay, what was her reaction?
She was a trance medium, so for her it wasn't a big deal.
Okay.
It was for the others in the room, it was a bit of a revelation. And I remember because two of them were clinical psychologists, you see, and I remember thinking, if I'm going crazy, I'm going crazy in good company. Because, do you know what I mean? You're
Yeah,
with
yeah.
people that, can look at it from both angles, as it were. But what I've realized is that the nonsense with psychology, modern psychology, is this, that, and psychiatry is that if you experience anything out of your five senses, then there's something wrong with you. And that's the problem, is that it's still very much considered an aberration to somebody experiencing other things until we get a more greater understanding of consciousness and the acceptance that we are more than our physical body. Then this is how we are going to be seen. Anyone who has these things, why do you think people don't talk about hearing voices or whatever, and the doctor says, oh, you're hearing voices? They don't ever, would never say, yes, I am, because they know exactly what the doctor's going to then say. And I remember one of these clinical psychologists, and I used to tease her because I said, yeah, and you're going to go back to your practice and you'll have this questionnaire for your clients and you'll be saying, are you hearing voices? And she was one of the best mediums around. She would bring in one of the North American Indian chiefs and come out with all this information, and she'd go through a practice and she'd have this questionnaire saying, are you hearing voices, as a negative to that person's health. I mean, the nonsense is so ridiculous. The whole thing's such a nonsense. And this is why, I do what I do, because I want people to understand that we are normally multidimensionally. We are normally tapped into the non-physical realm, that our consciousness is beyond our physical body. And if we allow ourselves to open up to that, so much more information and understanding of our world, our reality, who we are and what we're here for is then made available, and makes sense of this 3D reality that we are trapped into, which is limited and limiting.
That is beautiful. That's probably a great place for us to end.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us before you leave about any projects that you have going on right now, or any coming out projects, or anything that people should know about what you are doing now and how to get in touch with you?
Well, I'm easy to Google anyway, maryrodwell.com.au or cern.com.au. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Telegram and Messenger. So if anyone wants to contact me, I am doing, for the first time, a big awakening conference in Bundaberg, which is central Queensland, which is getting a lot of Indigenous presenters talking about their understanding connection to ETs as well, which is going to be, it's the first ever that's bringing in so many of the Indigenous peoples in our beautiful country in Australia. So that's in about a month's time or whatever. But I'm going to be involved in a TV project. I can't say any more about that at the moment, but it will be a little bit more mainstream, less of the standard, because we have to reach mainstream. We have to get people to realize that this is, that this is real, and that, that it's involving millions, that billions of people around the world that don't know what's going on or why, and just think it's just them and are isolated with it. So it's so important to get this information out. So what you're doing, Jack, is wonderful. So just keep doing what you're doing.
Well, I'm just bringing it to people. You are the real hero, and I can't tell you how grateful I am for what you are doing. And I think people like you are changing the world, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, so, but thank you very much for joining us here today. You're awesome. Keep on rocking.
Okay, Jack, take care. Look after yourself.